Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I am your host, Chris Angle. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature of concepts and ideas in current media. I'm the author of 5 books on philosophy known as the Detmar-Haskell Dialogues, and they are the nature of aesthetics, the nature of ethics, the nature of truth, the philosophical equations of economics, and the nature of the political left and right. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you like it, and comment. And if you'd like to give us an email, give us a shout at detmar.haskell@icloud.com. And so this week we're going to talk about the ethicality of the Iranian invasion. And so we're going to entitle this program, "Is the Military Invasion of Iran Ethical?" So in order for us to discuss ethics, we will need to define it. So ethics is the appropriate dispensation of respect. And we respect others in order to cooperate with them. And we cooperate with others because we realize when we cooperate with others to produce goods and services that working together is more efficient than to do it alone. And so we produce goods and services to bring us up away from misery, which is the essence of all that is good. And so we have to realize that ethics is the evolutionary mechanism that enables us to cooperate. And that tool is respect. And so now we have defined ethics. Let's use that definition to discern whether some recent actions by the U.S. military, directed by the president, could be considered ethical. Let's take for as our first example to be the invasion into Venezuela to capture the head of state there and bring him back to New York to face charges for narco-terrorism, conspiracy, and others. Okay, so the first thing we need to consider is whether Venezuela, directed by the head of state there, Maduro, did an anti-respectful action, that is, a disrespectful action against the United States. It appears that the U.S. DOJ considers that Maduro did facilitate the export and trafficking of illegal drugs into the United States. It would seem that there are some facts to back this claim up, as he has been captured and indicted in the Southern District of Federal Court in Manhattan on these charges. So we must assume that there is ample evidence to bring him up on such narco-terrorism charges. So now the response of the United States, since that Venezuela participated in drug trafficking into the United States of serious life-threatening drugs, an adequate response was to capture Maduro and bring him to the United States. Secondly, we have to consider whether it was not only a just action for the United States to capture Maduro, but was it a just and ethical action as per the U.S. government's responsibility to the people of the United States? And why I bring this up is that every action has a sacrifice-reward ratio. And in all that we do, we make sacrifices in order to achieve something that we seek that will make our lives better, which we will call the reward. So in this case, the sacrifice was small and the reward was 100% successful in the capture of Maduro. The sacrifice was small because there was no life lost. The reward was significant in that it may reduce the drug trafficking of a nation working to bring illicit drugs into the United States. So in the two actions that need to be understood in determining whether an action is ethical is first determining the actions of respect and disrespect and whether the sacrifice versus the reward was justified. In this case, both seem to be adequately fulfilled. The reason why we have to consider the ratio of the sacrifice versus the reward is because the government has an additional consideration when it comes to respect. It must respect the lives of the people for whom it is responsible. That is, the people of the United States are the main concern for the government of the United States. They can't just go out and send them, the people of the United States, to some horrendous situation or war without an overwhelming need to do so, because there's a contract involved. Its primary consideration is whether it is respecting the lives of its citizens. It cannot just go into war, thereby there would be a huge sacrifice by the citizens unless there is an even greater reward. A government must respect the lives of the citizens because there is a contractual obligation to do so. It cannot just go out into war whereby there would be a huge sacrifice by the citizens unless there is a commensurate or greater, appropriate, just reward. In this case, with Maduro, it's pretty clear that the sacrifice was small and the reward was large. Okay, so now let's go to another example. A good example would be the United States entry into World War II. When considering entering the war against Germany, that would have to be considered a huge responsibility in the sacrifice because it would place upon the population of the United States citizens a huge possibility of the loss of life. And if we capture its entry with the reward of saving Europe from Germany and saving millions from Nazism, it could be argued whether the United States should or should not have entered the war against Germany, as many would argue that there was no apparent national interest to do so. And for many years, the United States did hesitate. But of course, Pearl Harbor happened, and the United States almost had no choice as the Japanese came and used violent means, which is a sign of huge disrespect and demonstrated the will to cease all cooperation with the United States. And naturally, an appropriate action was for the United States to defend itself. That is, or was, pretty clear. There was no choice because it involved protecting its citizens. And so, the entry to World War II after Pearl Harbor became ethically justified. But now, let's go to another example, which is current in today's media, which is the title of this program. This would be the violence that the U.S. military operations is visiting upon Iran. First, Iran has a history of terrorism, disrespecting not only the United States, but many other countries around the world. They have their splinter groups that initiate terrorism in many countries, and an example would be Hezbollah. Iran has participated in making weapons that have been used by the United States, have been used against the United States, such as the IEDs that have maimed and injured and killed many U.S. servicemen. And thirdly, Iran has constantly threatened not only the United States, but other countries as well, particularly Israel, with extinguishment. So they have participated in terrorism, and they have threatened countries with severe retribution, and it's unclear why they do this. Well, perhaps it's their belief in the fundamentals of the Quran that might justify in their minds their belligerent terrorism and acts of violence, as there are many Quranic verses inciting violence to the unbeliever. But in addition to that, recently Iran, in the face of some protests against the economics of the Iranian regime, they have oppressed this protest so much to the extent that those caught were executed, a severe penalty, and a surprising one, just for an economic protest. Estimates are in the 30,000 people range that that possibly may have been executed by the Iranian regime. It's an amazing, astounding number. Such an unbelievable response. It's hard to believe. This, along with the history of terrorism, has produced a response by the United States to bring violence against the government of Iran, and so it is in progress as we speak. And so, is it ethical? First, to analyze the situation, Iran does a horrible, disrespectful thing against its own people and has constantly participated in disrespectfully assassinating others and exporting weapons of destruction to their groups that sponsor terrorism throughout the world. So, of course, in opposition to this disrespect, the United States and Israel have decided to counter this horribly disrespectful act of the Iranian regime with counter-violence. So far, it's ethical. The U.S. military action is to counter or to stop the unethical, terroristic actions of Iran, and the action is, in essence, self-defense. So now we have to consider the contract between the United States government and its own people, particularly those of the military who must make the sacrifices in order to punish the Iranian regime for its horrible actions. Well, so far, it seems that the U.S. sacrifices will be small in the sense that there will be little death of military personnel, and eventually there'll be success in giving to the Iranian people, and particularly the protesters, or whatever remains of them, an opportunity to change the Iranian government into a respectful world participant and bring their country to where it should be situated within the world community, which is to be a prominent and an ethical one. So now there's a third aspect to this violence or war that we must consider. Let's suppose that Iran is a peaceful country in the sense that it does not threaten its neighbors. It does not call the U.S. the Great Satan. It does not try to build intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach Europe and the United States. It does not proceed with belligerent weapons that have been used as typical of those used to kill U.S. troops and other troops of other countries also in the past. Let's suppose all this. But Iran being an authoritarian state, it does continue to violently subdue its citizens through executions of its own population where they protest against policies of the regime. Then, if it were not to be belligerent to other nations, can another country ethically invade or eliminate the leaders of Iran, such as what United States is doing presently, solely upon the reason of stopping the execution or the executions of its protesting citizens? Do we have any ethical and moral guidelines to help us decide whether it is right or wrong to invade only with the reason of the totalitarian's subjugation of its own citizens? How do we start? How do we come to a conclusion on this matter? Well, the answer is yes, there is an ethical basis by which another country can invade Iran, but there's a limiting factor involved. First, if Iran or any country for that matter begins a pogrom, that is, wholesale killing of its citizens, one could consider that hypothetically an invasion to stop the totalitarian regime doing the wholesale killing of its own people would be ethically okay. If it is okay because they're eliminating the horribly disrespectful actions of the totalitarian regime being executed upon its own subjects, and this is typical of totalitarian regimes as per the 7 dictums of the left, in my book, The Nature of the Political Left and Right, particularly dictum 5, which is the famous Lord Acton principle, that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. A totalitarian regime is subject to will of the aggression of power. And when that happens, their minds become corrupted because it's only their priorities that matter. And so they look, that is, the totalitarian leader would look down upon their subjects to the extent that they don't consider them worthy of any considerations. All you have to do is look back over history and see all the kings and queens and how they looked down upon their subjects. Thus, when they only consider their priorities and not those of all people in their society, they become corrupted. And they lose a sense of ethics. Because when they're in control, they know that they don't have to cooperate with others. And when they don't cooperate with others, they lose respect for them. And when you lose respect, you lose the ability to be ethical. And all that remains is the end justifies the means, which is the absence of ethics. And in this case, Iran loses its sense of ethics toward its own people. And so if another sees this unethicality, it may decide to intervene and stop the killing by the totalitarian leaders. But this country, such as the United States, may do so only if it's being ethical to its own citizens. And to explain, the U.S. must be ethical to its own citizens internally while applying ethics externally. And so in this case, it is to apply ethical behavior to save those in danger of being executed and destroyed and killed and executed inside the state of Iran by its corrupt totalitarian leaders. Further, there is an ethical need to do so because there is a contract in place with all human beings, with all other human beings in the world. All humans have at least some contractual obligation to be good to others. And I am sure that Jesus and his apostles would agree with that. But to proceed, their sacrifice must be small relative to the reward. And in this case, President Trump is respectful of that sacrifice, and that it must be small compared to the reward of stopping the wholesale killing of Iranian citizens. So far, he's been able to do that with the military having minimal losses. With the sacrifice of lives being small, it is justifiable to rectify the ethical considerations of the Iranian totalitarian government's attitude over their own people. Let's hope for the best. If you found this broadcast interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching the Philosophical Angle program.